Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm Zeldart, and this is the second video in a two-part series showing the process for a Princess Zelda illustration. If you haven't already, I'd recommend checking out the first video too, to see the very beginning of this piece, as well as a brief explanation of who I am and where I'm coming from. Now, I won't spend too much time talking about myself in this video, but you're more than welcome to comment or ask me a question in the section below the video, or you can find me over on Twitter. There will be a link in the video description, so be sure to head on over and say hi, give me a follow over there, and remember to hit the like and subscribe button on this video if you like my content. So I'm going to try to be a little bit more low-key with this video and just sort of drop in now and again and talk about the process of how I work for those who may be interested, as well as just talking in general either about art or about Zelda. I've been in some discussions online through Twitter and Discord and with friends in general, just talking about Zelda and what we think might be coming from the next game or just from the series in general. So I just thought it might be quite nice to just sort of share some of those points that I myself have had as well as others, and just see if we can get a discussion going either in the comment section or on my Twitter. Just about where we feel Zelda is and where it may be going. So for those of you who watched the first video, you'll notice that I took a step back from where that one had ended. And the initial idea was going to be a completely painted illustration, so there wouldn't have been any line art, so to speak. It would have been painted out and it would have just had a nice fully painted look. But I felt like it was just taking a little bit longer than I planned for to have this one done and ready. And so I decided to just sort of pull back from the initial idea and go with having a nice line art and some nice rendering sort of inside the line work and just sort of adapt it to a different style of art. Now, it is a style that I have done previously in sort of other areas of my artwork, but for a while my art's been slightly more towards realism, and so I wanted to sort of go back to doing some of the stylized stuff for this. So I decided to just remove all the color and the background and sort of rework the line art to give it like a nice sort of graphic aesthetic, and then redo the colors because they were just starting to look a little bit sort of dull and just a bit too dark, which was the initial tone I was going for, given that it's related to Breath of the Wild 2. So I was initially thinking of something that was a little bit more darker in tone, but then I wanted to try to have some nice colourful artwork. So I decided to rework all the colours and rework all the values and just pop things up a little bit. In terms of the background, I initially was going to have Zelda stood out in the fields of Hyrule, and I wasn't quite satisfied with how the background was coming along. I'm definitely more confident doing just characters, and I do a lot of sort of scenes and environments and things like that in my other avenues of art, but they usually sort of tend towards, again, a probably more realistic sort of aesthetic. And for Zelda, or at least for these kinds of illustrations that I'm doing, I wanted to make sure that I had a nice sort of stylized environment, which is something I do need to still practice with. So rather than trying to make my first illustration for Zelda be a challenge for myself, I just decided to take a step back and stick with where I'm most proficient. And so what I decided to do with this one is just to have a nice generic Princess Zelda on a plain enough background. You'll see towards the end that I do decide to add a little bit into the background just so that it's not a solid white, and it just adds a little bit more interest. A lot of this part was streamed on Twitch, which I will link in the video description for those who might be interested. I'm trying to get into a routine of streaming once a week, every Friday, and I need to take a look at the time zones to be able to give an accurate, or at least a best time to try to grab the most people. But everything that I stream gets saved to my Twitch account anyway, so it's all there for viewing, and I may look at even linking those back to this channel in case people want to watch those in real time, and if any discussions take place over on Twitch, then people can watch those and find out, what was being talked about and anything that was missed out. So most of this was done in the last 2 days, streaming on Twitch, and that's something that I would like to try to get up and running more consistently. So once a week without fail there would be a stream on the Friday, and some evenings I just have the time to be able to put the Twitch on, open up Photoshop, do some work, and just stream it as I go. So there's probably going to be quite a lot of content happening over there, so if you want to keep up, feel free to head on over. If you have a Twitch account, please follow me on there, I'd very much appreciate it. One of the points that I was discussing on Twitch was how it is that I work. Now, there's numerous ways of painting and picking colors and rendering. I just found that something that I sort of fell into, I guess, in the last few months maybe, was I sort of took a bit of a backseat from doing anything that was for commissions or projects, just to sort of practice and sort of improve in some areas that I wasn't feeling so confident with. And I just found a method, sort of through other channels and through other artists, just seeing how they work, practicing, and I sort of fell into an area that just I find works for me. So generally when most people, or I guess most people, paint, the assumption is to paint directly with color, which I do, and it is the most common, obvious way. But I just found that something that was working for me pretty well was what I do is I get all of my base color in, I lay down everything, so everything's on its own layer, everything is masked to its own section, and if you look over to the left of the screen you'll see how I've arranged all my layers. I try to stay as organized as I can, and sometimes it doesn't quite work out, but I feel like if I can at least try to categorize and stick things into groups and color code, then just at a glance I can tell sort of where I am and what section I should be focusing on and looking at. And so what I do is I get the base color down for the skin, the hair, the clothing, and I then copy my layer. I put that layer above, and the one below I will darken that down to sort of close to where I want the shadow color to be. So I'll have that come down darker, either more towards a warmer tone or a cooler tone, depending on what lighting. And then the color that was on top is the initial base color. I mask that out so that essentially it vanishes. And then all you need to do is on the mask, you paint either in black or white to show or hide. So you'll see that happening throughout the video. You'll see that rather than me painting in, the peachy skin color or the highlight color, all I'm really doing is just painting in black and white and revealing parts of the mask to present the shadow and the highlight areas. And that works quite well, actually. I could probably do exactly the same thing directly in color. In fact, I have done. I just feel like this one offers me a bit more control, because at any stage I can decide that the color just doesn't quite look right and I can adjust it, or I can paint parts of the mask so that I add more lighting or I hide more. And I just think it works quite well. So if it's maybe something you haven't tried doing in your own work, I'd suggest giving it a go. It works quite well, I think. One of the other things that I've been trying to do a lot more of as well is considering the shapes of the color, the light and the shadow that I've been putting in. Generally, when you tell someone to consider the shapes, most people, myself included for the longest time, just think that what you mean is literally looking at shapes. So squares, circles, triangles, the usual. But what I've been trying to do with that is whenever I'm putting in the shadow and the lighting, is I've been taking the time to try to find some interesting shapes to sort of add to the texture. And obviously you want things to look 3D, have a bit of depth, and be consistent with the lighting. So of course, if you've got a lighting scheme so that the light is shining from above and to the right, which is sort of what I was going for with this one, then obviously you want certain areas to be lighter than others. That's just a given. But I think one of the things that I had trouble with for a long time, and I think most beginners probably do, is the idea that every single part of the painting has to be completely painted. And for some areas it just doesn't really make much sense. For example, in this one you'll see later on when we get down to the lower legs and the boots. Obviously I give them some attention, make sure those are rendered so that you don't just have like a nice painted area up top and down the bottom is just flat color. But when it comes to the lightest areas and the section with, I guess, the most attention, I reserve that for places like the face and the cloak. It's really the areas where you want people to look at the most. So those are the places that I try to think more about how the lighting looks in and how I'm sort of shaping those. And I've been really enjoying the idea of having both sort of hard and soft shadow edges. I think one of the things that again used to terrify me, and I think most beginners probably struggle with, is the idea that I think we innately think of shadows and lighting as, well, most people probably do, is thinking of everything as being very, very soft. And so when you're shading, I guess the most obvious choice in terms of using digital brushes is to go for an airbrush, because I think you just instinctively feel that light works in such a way that everything will be very, very smooth. But then it just makes everything look very, very fuzzy. And I think there's a fear that comes with when you're painting having a very, very sort of hard edge. But if you do studies of, you know, things in your house, you do still lifes and things like that, and you study lighting, you'll see that, you know, more often than not, there's actually quite a lot of sort of hard edges. And so I've been doing that a lot more in my work lately, and I think it gives it quite a nice feel and quite a nice look. It just sort of carves things out and adds a lot more depth, at least in my own work, something that I've just been finding a lot more lately. And so you'll see it in this one, I think probably most prominently on the cloak. Beforehand was just quite flat. It was just, you know, a flat color. But then once I got the lighting in, you start to sort of feel like it has more folds than I drew in with lines, and it just has this nice sort of shape to it. So before I wrap this one up, just gonna segue slightly. So, Breath of the Wild 2, that is a game that so many of us are waiting to see more of and hear more of, and hopefully that's something that happens soon. But I'm just gonna talk about what I would like from it. So I was in a discussion with a friend of mine talking about the sequel, and one of the things, or I guess one of the biggest things that I'd said I was hoping for was to see this version of Hyrule with more life to it. And the response that I got back was that, you know, it is a post-apocalyptic Hyrule, so it's sort of empty for a reason. And I totally get that, you know, it does make sense. And, you know, Link wakes up and the world has almost ended. Makes complete sense. But I think most of us don't really want to do that same thing again. We'd love to go back to that Hyrule, which I guess is what's going to happen. And I think we all feel that it has to have some form of evolution. Now, we don't know how long after the first one this sequel takes place. It could be very, very shortly after, or it could be a few years after, who knows. But it definitely has to evolve from just being a wasteland, because one of the things that I had said to my friend about it was that for a Hyrule that's the biggest, sort of most open, most explorable they've ever done, I think the trade-off for any of those kind of open world games where it's very much, you know, go where you want, do what you want, nothing stands in your way kind of deal, is that it doesn't let the developers have a chance to sort of, you know, keep some of the cards close to their chest in a way. In terms of story and, you know, what answers they give you with the lore, you know, of course they can, but otherwise you have free reign to go where you want, and there's something very, very cool about that, but at the same time it's sort of limiting into what can be presented. And the way that I explained that was how, you know, you could take a previous game, you know, Twilight Princess for example, and, you know, you could make your way to the, you know, the Farron Woods or the Snow Peak ruins, and you can't go up those mountains anywhere you want. So you could look out and just have this sense of what lies beyond, you know, that icy peak. You know, nobody knows. But it allows you this sense of, it makes, in my opinion, it made Hyrule feel larger, because whilst physically there are borders, you know, there's no real sort of barrier in that sense. And in Breath of the Wild, I feel like there is. I mean, sure, you know, beyond the land of Hyrule, there's like a huge chasm, and then lands beyond, but I mean, you know, nothing gets mentioned about those from a lore perspective. So, I mean, let's face it, it's purely for a gameplay standpoint. It's just so that you don't literally reach just a drop off and there's an endless void. You know, on the one side, there is an ocean. They possibly could have done an ocean all around. Maybe they have plans for that landmass that you see sort of, you know, northwest. But otherwise, in the previous games, you could just get this sense that because you can't go to the end of the continent, you have no idea how big Hyrule is. There's no telling what undiscovered landmarks there are. But in Breath of the Wild, as far as the borders of the continent go, you can literally go from one end to the other and stop at every landmark on the way. You can explore every landmark and check it out and do what you want. And when those areas are either, in terms of Breath of the Wild's timeline, it's its own modern day, you know, when most of those things are just, you know, some modern settlement or civilization or town, village, etc., that has just been destroyed, well, then there's no history to that, you know, apart from the fact that 100 years ago it was destroyed. Like, okay, but we have an answer. You know, everything else is just left, you know, in mystery. You know, the Forgotten Temple, there's no telling how long that's been there, what it was, and all those sorts of things. But you go there to explore, and it's just a shell littered with guardians. You know, it would have been very, very cool had it been like previous games where you could discover these, you know, ancient landmarks and locations, and there's something, you know, mystical or magical that resides within. That would have been really, really cool. Instead, everything is just almost too real, you know? You don't sort of get, you know, ambushed or taken by surprise entering this location to find there's, you know, an ancient spirit that's been, you know, scaring off, you know, villagers or townsfolk for many, many years, and nobody dares go to this, you know, this cave or this dungeon, this temple, this whatever it is, because, you know, at night they hear screams or the sound of, you know, tortured souls, anything, something that gives this sense that there's a lot of, you know, deep history and magic to Hyrule. But in this one, there just really wasn't. You know, anywhere you go that's, you know, considered, you know, vastly interesting, it's just, for the most part, it'll just be the same enemies that you find anywhere, or it's just guardians. And so the point that I'd made was it would have been nice to have this Hyrule, but with that genuine sense of, you know, mystery and sort of magic. And yes, it has its own mystery. There's plenty of, you know, little nods to previous games and Easter eggs that sit around Hyrule that you can wonder, you know, what is this place? How did it end up there? What does this mean? But I don't know. I just think it didn't quite have the same intrigue as some of the previous games, where you can go to a location and because you can't scale those walls, walk through that desert, you can't go beyond those trees. It just gives this sense of there's no telling how big Hyrule really is, how much there is left to discover out there. And obviously, the story that we're experiencing, it, you know, just takes place in this small section in a way. And with the second one, I said that the way that I'd summed it up was, for a game so big, or for, you know, Hyrule being so big, I've never felt so sort of limited when it comes to a Zelda game. You know, when I played The Wind Waker many, many years ago, that felt like this huge, epic journey, you know, to the unknown. There's no telling what was out there. And I think, to start with, Breath of the Wild has that, but then once you've spent however many hours you've spent on it, you realize that everything is just, you know, everything is just a stage, in a way. You know, they created these new mechanics, these new gameplay mechanics, which are fantastic, but Hyrule just literally feels like it's just a stage to present these gameplay mechanics. And I just think that a lot of that sort of lore and, you know, the magic of what Hyrule is, and, you know, what Zelda is, I think that was just lost in this one. So I'm really hoping that's something that returns in the sequel. And not everyone's going to agree with me. In fact, if you do disagree with me, I'd love to hear your own reasons. You can leave me a comment either in the comment section below, or you can find me on my Twitter. And I'm all for having discussions, you know, with other fans, and sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of, you know, what we like and what we don't like. So if you want to explain to me why you think that maybe this is the best Hyrule, or how you experienced it, because, you know, I might even learn something, that my 400 hours of playing it is something that I missed, or I looked at it from a different angle. So it would be great to get a discussion going with other fans and sort of hear, you know, other people's views. So feel free to comment, and when we can talk about it. So that's I guess that's sort of what I feel about it. And so there we have it. That is the final illustration. This one was a lot of fun to work on, and outside of my other art ventures, this one was so relaxing and a lot of fun to do. And I'm already planning for the next one. I will be posting a sketch of the next piece that I'm doing on my Twitter. If you want to jump over there and give me a follow, I'd really appreciate that. And you can check out the next piece. So let me know what you think. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I was somewhat entertaining to listen to. I'm still figuring out how to do this, so I hope you'll bear with me. But I hope you like the video, and please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.